Let's get into today's topic. Who broke the trust in marriage? Is it broken really? Yeah. And why are we talking about trust in marriage? And believe me, it's not what you think. It's going to be something totally different than what you think. It's not about you cheating and all that. Yeah. There is a trust because marriage is a trust. I'll start with 3 stories. Some time back, I attended a training. And in that training, one of my fellow trainees was a pastor for one of the big churches in Nairobi. And we were discussing, the training was on mediation. And we were discussing, and I was asking him, so what made you go into mediation? And he told me something. And he said, as a pastor, part of what we do is counseling. But I found myself over the last few years, especially during COVID, I've been trying to counsel a lot of couples whose marriages were breaking up. And unfortunately, most of them would end up separating or breaking up, divorce. And his biggest concern was that divorce and separation has become normalized in the church. There was a time where such cases were few and far between, but now it's normalized. It's normal. Yeah. Some marriages don't even launch. I know a few. Big, elaborate church wedding, and within a few months they are separated. But that was his concern. Why are marriages separating? People in marriages are separating and divorcing. And why is it becoming so normalized in the church? So that's the first story. The second story, I have a friend, and my friend belongs to a group of about 60. There's a group of about 60 men. They do business together, they are friends, they do a lot of activities together. And, we were discussing, and he was telling me he was sad because during the COVID period, over half of them separated with their wives, and some even divorced with their wives during COVID. Yeah. And the rates of divorce are just skyrocketing. In fact, the younger generation is wondering, what's the point if marriage is leading to divorce? So that's the second story. Just think about it. Let's go into the third one. The third one was an article I read about a certain man who met this lady, and they had, I think the lady was expecting, but the child was not his. So he still took her in. I don't know if they got married. I think they got married. And then they had another child. I think the second child was his. But then she later had another child who was not his. And it didn't work out for them. They had to divorce, and the issue went to court. And the gentleman was asked to pay for child support. I don't know if the second child was his or not. I can't remember for sure. But the issue was that because he assumed parental responsibility, he should pay for those children when knowing full well they are not his. And that's how the court ruled. And this is paternity fraud. Yeah. Because fraud is obtaining something by false pretense. So this lady knew very well the child is not his. She knew what she was doing. But she still went ahead and did it, and even went further and took him to court, knowing full well that the courts will side with him, with her. The laws will side with her. And my question is, the laws, there was a time when such things would be resolved at home and everyone would come out with a satisfactory answer. But today, some of these things have real life repercussions, because now this gentleman will be asked to pay child support for children who are not his for the next 18 years. That's slavery. That's what Delilah did to Samson when she handed him over to the Philistines. Yeah? And they gouged out his eyes and chained him. And they would pull him out for entertainment. That's what happens when you're dragged to family court. You become the laughing stock of everyone there. Anyway, but that's just my take on it. So, the reason why this topic is important is because now we need to start taking these things seriously, because they have real life repercussions. You can find yourself, I've heard of cases where maybe you just met this lady, you hung out with her once or twice, took a photo or two with the children. She takes them to court and says you had assumed parental responsibility. The child had bonded with you, knowing full well it's not true, and the court side with her. Yeah? So my question is, who broke the trust? And marriage is one of 3 decisions that are very important in anyone's life. The 3 most important decisions you will make in life is 1, who you will marry. Number 2 is what business you will go into or career you'll go into. And number 3, where you will live. Those 3 are very critical. They'll affect your life in very many ways. But marriage, I think, is the most important, because all blessings and all bad things come through relationships. And getting into the wrong relationships for the wrong reasons, starting on the wrong footing, can really mess up and destroy your life. It can destroy your life to the point where you lose all hope. You can no longer see ahead. Like Samson when they gouged his eyes out. You can't see ahead. To the point where people even contemplate taking their own life. There are so many cases in the media about that. So, let's look at marriage. And I'm going to explain to you why I think when I say marriage is a trust, this is what I mean. All law comes from God. All law comes from God. In fact, the word law, L-A-W, is an acronym which stands for land, air, water. The 3 branches of law. Not the ones you read about that the legal system tries to tell us. The 3 branches of law. Common law, that's the land of the air, of the land, the law of the land. Common law. The law of the air is trust law. And the law of the water is maritime admiralty law. Those 3 branches of law. Law is another area that I'm really interested in. So, trust law is the highest form of law. It is the highest form of law. Because if you know anything about a trust, in a trust you have a trustee who acts for the benefit of the beneficiaries, and they have a relationship which is known as a fiduciary relationship, where everything you do, you're doing it for the benefit of the beneficiary. You don't put your own interests there. Everything has to be for the benefit of the beneficiary. And marriage is construed as such, as a trust and a common law. And when you talk about common law, it's not the English common law that is written down. Common law is the unwritten law. In fact, it's not even common law as in law. It's common law, L-O-R-E, common law. That's the law of the land, the law of the people who live in the land. And it is the people who create this trust. Marriage is construed as such. Unfortunately, governments have come in and they've usurped marriage. But let's talk about the common law aspect, because even when you go to family court, you're told, we're making this decision, we consider the benefit, like the best interest of the child. Yeah? And that is how marriage is construed. And in such a case, most of the time, the court will rule with the best interest of the child. Although, unfortunately, in our current court system, that doesn't happen. So, and you're wondering, why am I saying that all law comes from God? Because when God created, and this comes from the Christian, the Judeo-Christian tradition. In the book of Genesis, after God created and he gave man dominion of all things in the land, in the air, and in the water. The land, and the air, and in the water. L-A-W, law. So, that is where law comes from. And when God finished creating, he entrusted what he had created to man. All his creation. So the environment also falls under trust law. All of creation. Then he created the woman also for the man. And she was entrusted to him. And they had children. And the children were covered in that trust. And without these trusts, it is very difficult to have a functioning marriage. And this is how the trusts broke. Trusts, as they were formed under common law. Common law deals with men and women, not legal persons. Because God created man. Then man created government. And then government created legal persons. Then governments went ahead and diminished in status, diminished man's status to a legal person. A man is not a person. A man is flesh and blood. A legal person is a vessel, like the way you'd have a business created by the government. The government has full jurisdiction and domain over legal persons, but it has no jurisdiction over man. And when man created government, he created government to protect the property of man. Then the government created businesses, registered, legal persons created businesses, still under government. And churches are also created under government. They are registered entity. In fact, when you get your marriage certificate, it is a 3-way contract with the government as the primary party in those contracts. The government gets to administer that contract. But marriage was never construed as such. In fact, under the government, a marriage is a partnership because they are marrying two legal vessels. But marriage, as it was created by God, falls under common law, which is the law of man, not the law of persons. I think up to there we are. And this is very important. And I shall talk about this in very many other settings. So when you say, oh, I'm going for a church wedding, oh, I want a church wedding, I want to make it a church wedding, it's just a legal contract with the government. The churches, they go, they get those things from the government, and they come and they administer it. You bring in the government, which is a non-living entity. You see, when you talk about man, man is flesh and blood, living entity. A government or a church or a corporation, these are fictional characters on paper. They are two-dimensional entities that want to preside over three-dimensional beings, human beings, flesh and blood. So when you're going there, getting into a church wedding contract with the government, all that, you're just inviting non-living entities into your marriage. Like inviting ghosts into your marriage to come and mess you up. And these things have been hidden from a lot of people. They've been hidden deliberately. Marriage, whether you go to the registrar or you go to the church today, your registered church, it's a three-way contract with the government as the primary. But the government looks at it as business. You're either productive or you're not productive. It is all that partnership. So, it's very important to understand this. Because when you're acting at the level of a legal person, a person is not a man. A person is a legal vessel. When you're operating at that level, you're under the government. But the Creator never entrusted these things to government. These things were entrusted to man, not government, not legal persons. And many of you, I'm sorry to say this, don't know how to move through life as men and women. Maybe our grandfathers knew how to move around as men and women. Many of you move as legal persons. You might not understand what it means to be a man. So, it is important that you understand this. This is very, very important because it's foundational. Once you understand that these trusts that the Creator entrusted it to man, not to government, not to church. It was entrusted to man. That is why only man tithes to God. Your business doesn't tithe. Your church doesn't tithe. Government doesn't tithe. Because those are not living entities. Those are like ghosts. They're not living entities. Only living entities tithe to the Creator. Yeah. Anyway, let me take a quick break. Then I'll come back and we'll go deeper into it. And it's very important that you understand this. Some things are spiritual. Some things are not. Some things are just ignorance. And problems rooted in ignorance cannot be solved spiritually. You can go and pray and pray and pray. It won't help. You remember those dominions you hear in church, dominions and principalities. This is what we are talking about. It's very important that you understand this.